That's a good question. This is the big question. This is the ultimate question, right? Which is, there's a hadith that seems to contradict what I think is reasonable, possible, or right. How do I deal with that? There's a couple of approaches. The sort of traditional Sunni approach would be that God and the Prophet know better on a moral issue. Another approach is also legitimately Islamic and Sunni and Shia. It would be, there are instances, for example, there's a hadith that says, Shahra Eid la yanqusan, in Sunan of Abu Dawud, that 2 months of festival are never short. But Eid and Ramadan and Dhul Hijjah. But we know that Ramadan and Dhul Hijjah is frequently not 30 days, sometimes they're 29 days. This hadith is on its face false. So what do people like Ibn Hanbal al-Bukhari say? They say, well, it's not literal then. It means either the barakah you get in these months will always be complete, or Ibn Hanbal said they're never both short in the same year, which is wrong. So if you see something that contradicts empirical reality, you just realize that it's figurative. And I mentioned this before in other lectures I've given, but the hadith of when the Prophet asked Abu Dhar, do you know where the sun goes after it sets? He says, God and the Prophet are more knowledgeable. And he says, it goes before the throne of God, and it prostrates. Seeks permission to rise again. People in the early 20th century, Muslims who are pious Muslims, they want to believe in their religion. They flip out over this hadith. It makes them, it panics them. There are writers who reject the whole hadith tradition because of hadiths like this. It contradicts clear scientific reality that these early Muslims didn't know. How much more subject to historical contingency can a hadith be? Are we really going to base our religion on ideas that are clearly wrong, that someone believed based on scientific ideas that later turned out to be false? Medieval Muslims, but my response is, medieval Muslims also got confused by this hadith because it doesn't make any sense. If you look in Nawawi talks about it, how does the sun prostrate? It doesn't have it's like a wall. What is it? I don't understand how this works. So they say it's figurative. It means it prostrates to God's, that shajaru wa najmu yasjudan. Sun and trees prostrate to God. So people have to. You ask the biggest question in the history of Islamic interpretation, and then you want me to not answer it. So what is it you're trying to say?
So I've got sort of the gist of your answer. So given what you said to the second question, is it not reasonable then to question the first question on that basis, ethical precepts?
But I didn't answer the full question.
No, I'm just saying that you see it as an option. I'm just saying, not that I believe that it is a question ethically, but I'm saying there are individuals that do see that as an ethical question, and there is a contentious issue there. But given the answer to your second question, that it's actually an option to revisit hadith in this life, because it clearly goes against empirical evidence, then why not apply the same type of reasoning for the first scenario about Aisha's age?
But I haven't. You need to spend more time on Muslim scholars, because they're never going to give you a short answer to a question. I'm giving you the menu options. You can't ask me to answer the question before I finish answering the question. I'm giving you different options, right? There's possibility. One possibility is you simply say, "Sami'na wa ata'na." God said, "We hear, we obey." The sun prostrates. Okay, the sun prostrates. Fine, it prostrates. I admit it. Or you can say, okay, I understand, but it doesn't make sense to me. How does this work? Literally, it doesn't work. It contradicts. That's why the 2 months in everyone's short hadith is a great example, because this is something you can't deny. No one is going to debate whether or not the month of Ramadan is 29 or 30 days that year. You can get an astronomical calendar and figure this out. It's not subject to interpretation. The hadith is false. It's false on its face. Therefore, it's either not true, the Prophet didn't know what he was talking about, or we interpret it figuratively. The first two options, a Muslim would like to rule out, because they'd like to think that the Prophet speaks the truth. They'd like to think that their science of hadith authentication works. So the third option is taken. You interpret it figuratively, which is totally reasonable, because figurative use of language, according to some scholars like Giambattista Vico in the 1700s, figurative language is the real nature of language. Really, figurative metaphor is how we speak. Literal language is not. Literal understanding is a secondary feature. So, there's the problem, however, when you get to ethical issues. Because there's no objective standard to measure ethics. There's no objective standard to measure right and wrong. Because right and wrong are different for different people. There's no... What?
I find that...
You don't agree?
No. I think
really? You're not an Ashari. You're not... I mean, what is... So, who came up with this crazy idea that there's no such thing as universal right and wrong? Which like crazy lunatic came up with this idea? This is Protagoras. This is one of Plato's opponents in Plato's mind, Protagoras. This is what the sophists are accused of not believing in universal rights and wrong. They said right and wrong are relative to what city you're in. Right and wrong are based on convention. They're based on culture, which is exactly what Sunni Muslims say. I don't know about 12 or Shia. I'm not saying I just don't know the answer to that. Is that right and wrong are conventional. They're based on place and time. And if you want to make universal arguments for that, you better come up with some way to justify that. The Muslim answer is that the universal answers can be provided by Scripture, by revelation from God. Other arguments for universal rights and wrong now are based on things like human rights, universal human rights. The problem with that argument is that they keep adding more human rights, and you sit and wonder that 1 year something's right, and the next 10 years later it's wrong, or vice versa. And so one wonders how truly universal this can be, or to what extent I should be sacrificing my religious values for a system of values that seems to change every decade. Right? And this is...
I think, after you finish on your answer to that question, I think we're wrapping it up, and we'll come back at 2 o'clock.
Sorry, I don't mean to go beyond. He asked this gigantic question. So the issue then, I'll be done, I'll finish presently.
We do one more question.
So the issue, the question is, how do you determine what's right and wrong?
Yeah,
and one has to...
I wasn't arguing for a position. I was just saying, is it reasonable and should be accepted as an opinion, a valid opinion? Given the answer to your second question with all the options, could someone revisit the age of Aisha and say, for ethical reasons, maybe it's not true? That's what I was asking.
Yeah, I mean, you could do that, but then my question would be, what motivates you? And this is what people like Ahmed Shaker, who wrote against Abbas al-Qadi, wrote. They said, why are you doing this? What you're admitting, what you're saying, is that the critics are correct. Where do you get your values? Is he saying? Where do you get your values? Do you get them from your religion, or do you get them from some other culture that, by the way, 10 years ago didn't care about this?
I do find that a bit simplistic.
No, I don't think it's simplistic at all.
Because there are hadith that talk about, for example, the offspring of the adulteress is worse than the adulterer.
And guess what? They don't interpret these. The vast majority of Muslim scholars either say that hadith is false, or they interpret it figuratively.
But why? Because ethically it doesn't make sense.
Because the person's la taziru waziratun wizra ukhra. How can somebody be blamed for something that is not that they didn't do?
But that's an ethical precept.
That is a Quranic ethical precept.
Yes, of course.
A Quranic ethical precept, not one based on external sources.
But hold on, but there's a hadith that actually states that, so we have to balance that out with the precepts that we have, and the Quran speaks about Islamic precepts. I mean, it's an absurd argument, because what you're saying is that effectively we cannot determine and identify justice without revelation. And I just think that when we look at the scholarly discourse, there are some issues that aren't stipulated by the Quran and the Hadith, and they had to use that Akkar, their reason, to develop opinions. So
I think if you want to talk about justice or equity in a specific situation, every day we use our reason to come up with what is just or equitable in a specific situation. And we don't necessarily refer to Scripture. However, no one is going to argue that my decision in this specific situation should be universally applied to all human beings in all places and all times, retroactively applied to people in the past and used to judge them. That's nonsense. So there's a difference between using reason to come up with justice or equity in a specific situation and saying that it can derive universal principles that should be applied to all. That's what I'm arguing.
I wasn't arguing for absolute right.
Yeah.
Just one
more question.
That you may not be able to reconcile with your current perspective of things. He said either you take it allegorically or you take it metaphorically, or figuratively you interpret that, or you're saying the Prophet spoke what he spoke was nonsense. But nobody says that you can't open the Hadith to scrutiny.
Yes.
You earlier mentioned the Al-Ninowy said everything in the Mussab.
Yeah, I mean that was the third option that I didn't get to mention, which is that you look at the Hadith and maybe you decide it's not authentic. But my question is, what is the criterion for deciding it's not authentic?
Could we not employ tools that have developed since, for example, the Sahih? Since then, we have corpus of the Hadith and tools that have developed to continue to use these newly developing tools to scrutinize existing Hadith that may be taken for granted as being Sahih.
Yeah, I mean, some people will probably dislike my answer, but yes, I would take the position that Shaykh Al-Albani said, which is, by the way, Muslim scholars had said for centuries before that, which is that everything is subject to debate. Everything is subject to evaluation. The reason why people rejected his arguments that you're criticizing Sahihain, which no one had really objected to before the 1700s, or really the 20th century, is because it's what it meant, what's behind what you're doing. It's not about, if you want to sit and criticize, scholars get together and criticize Hadith and Bukhari and Muslim, no one's going to have a problem. What's the problem? The problem is the criticism against Bukhari and Muslim are really criticism against the Islamic ethical system. The idea of Scripture, the idea of religion as being the main reference in your life, the idea that you should overturn things in the past because of fads in the present. That's why there's such defensiveness about those books, and defensiveness about reevaluating Hadith. It's not because scholars really reject reevaluating Hadiths. They never did. But they're afraid that they're opening a door to modern ephemeral fads or ephemeral beliefs overturning centuries of consensus.
Really draw a line.
The reason why you're afraid of opening the doors is because opening the doors causes conflict. And when you open the doors without any kind of control, you get... But people are always saying, there's like the Muslim Martin Luther of the week. Like there's the Quran Discovery article. Every 6 months there's a new Muslim Martin Luther. Does anyone... I'm not from... I live in the United States. I don't live in Europe. People remember what the Protestant Reformation caused. Utter complete chaos, politically and theologically and socially, until people realized that no, you can't just have everybody revalue. You have to have some kind of interpretive control, otherwise the world becomes unmanageable.
But people around that, for example, they would have taken what he said as person understood. That what he said about the Muslim Ahmed was acceptable one way or another in Sahih, then the people around him would have taken that on board as accepted. Now we're looking at it and say, well, no, we can't. We need to relook at this and reevaluate this. It should continue.
I agree with you, but that we have to recognize that within a religious tradition, there have to be certain controls on interpretation. what you're talking about is a tangential issue. When you're talking about the details, yeah, people can reevaluate till their heart's content. But when you're talking about the core, like the Quran, like things that are agreed upon, like there's 5 prayers, where the fornication is prohibited. If you want to open up that to discussion, the religious tradition will cease to exist. It will evaporate. Well, I think it will. I mean, look at look at religion in many European countries or in urban America. It doesn't mean anything anymore. My haircutter, he comes and says like everything's about God, man. It's all about God, God, God. I was like, I didn't want to say to him, but I was like, what does that mean? I mean, it just means nothing. I don't know what it means.